Okay, let's go ahead and get this started. I am Jeff Martin, and I am the Director of Communications and Public Affairs for the American Anthropological Association. I am an older white male with graying brown hair and wearing black framed glasses and a black collared button-down shirt. And I am reporting to you still from the confines of my apartment, but I'm hoping that we can break out of this soon. Welcome to Careers in the Public Sector. This is the 6th of an 8-part Pathways to Career webinar series brought to you by the AAA. And this is going to run through April 22nd. We only have 2 remaining webinars, including next week's Using Archaeological and Anthropological Skill Sets as Accessible Designers. You can see the remaining schedule on a slide that will be presented to you shortly. And also, you can learn more about the webinar series. I am going to go to it right now. Hold on. And I'm going to send this in the chat right now. Our website for the all of our career Pathways to Careers webinars. All of these career webinars are usually held on Thursdays and at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So keep that in mind. Back to this webinar. To make this more accessible to everyone, we're providing closed captioning. And for all of you who don't know how to do this, to get closed captioning, take your cursor and move it down to the bottom of your screen, and you'll see the icon, the closed captioning icon. And click on that, and it will appear. If you'd like to ask your question verbally or hop on video, please use the raised hand feature in this reactions icon at the bottom of your screen. And direct any access needs to Nell, our accessibility coordinator, and she's listed as such in the chat. So you'll see that there. Also a reminder to please turn your video off and your microphone off unless you're speaking, as this will help increase our bandwidth. We are going to be holding a Q&A session at the end. However, if you have questions during, you don't have to wait until the end. Go ahead and put your question in the chat room again. And if you would, to make it easier for us, put question and then the colon so we can see it's a question right off the bat. Of course, as always, use the chat room to feel free to say, to either answer questions you think you can answer that someone else has previously asked, or, you know, it's good when I see people say, hey, I have this software and this helped, or I did this to help. So feel free to chat in the chat room. Without any further ado, let me introduce Elizabeth Bridey.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you today virtually. And I am Elizabeth Bridey, a white woman with brown eyeglasses and short hair. Today I'm wearing a blue top. I'm in my alcove, a little space in my house with a window. Next slide. So this is our Pathways to Careers, and today we focus on careers in the public sector. I think you're going to enjoy this program immensely. Our first speaker will be talking about her position in the federal government in the US, and our second speaker will be talking about his position at a state level in Washington State, also in the US. So let me go ahead and begin by introducing our first speaker, Ariela Zycherman. She works for the federal government at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA. Ariela?
Hi, my name is Ariela Zycherman. I am a woman with brown hair and large tortoiseshell glasses. Today, I'm in my office, which doubles as a kindergarten right now. I am an environmental anthropologist in the federal government. My title is Program Manager and Social Scientist at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA's Climate Program Office. I manage a program called the Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments Program. It's popularly known as RISA. And the program supports interdisciplinary science teams to build relationships with local decision makers in order to help them adapt to climate change. And the program has a really strong emphasis on interdisciplinary sciences, really pushing the limits of where social science can contribute to this work, and has a really nice balance between both research and engagement. It's fairly unusual in the science space to have such applied research happening. Next slide, please. My anthropological background is as an environmental anthropologist, and as a student, I focused on food and agricultural systems, rural livelihoods, household decision-making, and natural resource management, all within the context of how local decisions, local family choices, and culture are impacted in indirect ways by environmental, economic, and social policies. And here is an example of me doing fieldwork in the Bolivian Amazon, looking at food categories, asking the Tsimane people why some foods are fungible while others are used for subsistence agriculture. And you might notice here that even though I now work in climate, I don't consider my background to be in climate. Climate, for any food or environmental anthropologist, climate is a central part of the work. It is always there as an impact, but it doesn't work alone. It works together with other large stressors that happen in environmental, economic, and social policies. It interacts with culture, it interacts with society. And I take that point of view to my work now as an environmental anthropologist who can cover multiple streams of the environment. Next slide. So what do I do? A lot of things. I do a lot of things. And program management is a really overarching term for how people in government manage money. So there's really two parts of my job. There's the program management side and the social science side. For program management, I manage a competitive science funding portfolio. We develop opportunities for federal funding, thinking about the program's philosophy, the program's approach, how this fits into a larger NOAA-wide strategy or any other agency strategy. And we look at inputs from Congress, from potential primary investigators, from the literature, and from the agency administration strategic plans to sort of formulate what we're going to fund and how we fund it. Part of that is managing a peer review process. And some of you might be familiar with this from applying to grants to support your own research, but what happens is that we organize a panel of experts who can review the proposals and identify strengths and weaknesses, and this helps us make funding decisions. Part of this work is knowing what's happening across all the funded awards that we have in our proposal, being able to pull out common themes, innovations, effective outcomes, outputs, and talk to agency leadership, Congress, to other agencies about this work and really showing why it's impactful. And another aspect of this work is coordination, linking these commonalities across federal agencies, across public and private partnerships, and really highlighting the work of social scientists in these strategy discussions. On the social side, I do not necessarily act as a researcher, though I am currently doing some research. But more regularly, I act as a subject matter expert. I'm often asked for my expertise in methodologies. I consult on survey design, on assessment and monitoring work. I think about metrics for evaluation. I also think about questions, large, fundamental, empirical social science questions. And I find ways to bring those to the top of the conversation so that when in climate, for example, we don't only think about the physical impacts of climate, but we think about the social impacts of climate. We think about the differences between communities when they're able to recover or not able to recover to climate damages. And so part of that job is knowing what's happening in the fields across social sciences. So not just anthropology at this point, but thinking about sociology, about history, about cultural geography. I don't delve too much into economics because that has a huge position in the federal government. Economics is quite popular, but bringing representation to the other social sciences and demonstrating why you can't do the physical without the social. So this is really the fundamental core work of my job. Next slide. To do this work, there are some fundamental key anthropological skills that could help you do this work. And I really believe that all the way from undergraduate to senior social scientists in an academic institution, everybody has these skills. And they fall into two buckets, administrative and technical. In the administrative side, there's project management. If you've ever done a research program, you have this skill. You know how to find the personnel to do the work. You know who the PIs are, the primary investigators. You know what the methods are. You know how to manage the budget. You know what how to manage the data, and you know how to analyze it. You also know how to translate that work into some final project or product. On the financial management side, it's about knowing the budget for now, for later, and making sure that it is always in line and done properly. You're thinking strategically about how you fund things and how you support other things. And I can't stress enough how much of my job is about financial management itself. And then there's the communications, written and verbal. And I think that most anthropology students or anthropologists have these skills, but I will say they are different in government, especially the federal government. The written skills need to be quick, concise, and clear, and they need to be turned around, like that. And I have to answer all sorts of questions from a very high level. So those are skills that I had to learn later after I finished school. But these are the skills that you have the basis for, the backbones for. On the technical side, there's the methodological skills, like I mentioned before, knowing about qualitative and quantitative methods, but also knowing why you would use some in some cases and some in other cases. There's the subject matter expertise. I consider myself an environmental anthropologist. I have very clear expertise in agriculture and food, but I have committed to learning more about water, about climate systems, about forestry systems and things like that in order to give a broader view. And I'm regularly asked about things that are just slightly out of my comfort zone, but that I can pick up that information pretty quickly by just having some basic skills. And then the analytic part is knowing how to read a data set, particularly quantitative data sets. I need to be able to pull out outcomes and outputs very quickly, but increasingly there's interest in how to use that qualitative research or qualitative stories of outcomes and using those to report up as important parts of your program management. And that'll be a really great opportunity, I think, going forward to really show off some of those ethnographic skills and really show why they're important for thinking about change and resiliency. So with all that said, most important as a personal skill, I think creativity and flexibility are the things that have made me successful in the federal government. Being interested in innovation, both in peer review or in project management, thinking about new ways to answer questions that are unanswered, thinking about ways to engage with different kinds of scientists, even if you don't know how offhand. These are the ways that you can really show your utility. And being flexible and not staying committed just to one science that you studied in school, but thinking about how that science can build up or be scaled out into new things, because you have the fundamental knowledge of how to ask an anthropological question, and using that to be flexible to answer other questions, I think are great opportunities to use those anthropological skills. Next slide. So if you're thinking of a federal career, the first place I would go is to usajobs.gov. This is the clearinghouse for federal civil servant jobs. There's also opportunities for contracting jobs. And if you want in the Q&A, I can address that a little bit, but I am much more familiar with being a civil servant and having a federal position. But in USA Jobs, you can search for all different kinds of positions. You might put in the terms social scientist or a policy analyst or scientist, or you might put in something more specific like forests or agriculture or natural resource management. And then you can see what kinds of jobs pop up, and they are all over the country. So don't just think that you need to go to Washington to take one of them. But in order to be competitive, you cannot just rely on your research skills in school. I would really recommend getting a non-academic experience, either in an NGO or in a local government or in a research institute or something that's doing science policy in some way, taking science and then applying it to policy work, or thinking about the utility of yourself and your skills in a different setting. I think that would be really helpful to show particular skills. For me, I was able to move into government through a policy-oriented fellowship, which I really recommend. I went through the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. And the program puts PhDs in science policy positions, and I don't think I explained it yet, but science policy really refers to the use of science to make policy and the use of policies to manage science. So those two spaces. And I was able to learn a ton of skills about how to change my writing, how to change my communication skills, and how to really think about management as a way to use anthropology. And so I just really recommend that as a starting point to enter the government. And AAAS is one way to do it, but there's also the Knaus Fellowship at NOAA. There's the Presidential Management Fellowship through the federal government. And then there's many state fellowships that also focus on this work. But needless to say, I think that everybody is prepared, and you just have to think creatively about how to present your skills in order to show that you can make that jump from pure academic research and thinking into really an applied space.
Next slide, please. And now we're going to move to Stephen Thomson. Stephen.
Good morning from the West Coast. I am a white male with a graying half beard, brown hair, and eyeglasses. I am wearing a navy blue shirt with white stripes today, and I am joining you from my supervisor's office. So I'm going to start with a little bit different angle. I'll tell you just a little bit about myself and my background. So I definitely started in a doctoral program in the lone wolf ethnographer tradition. I was not in a program that emphasized practicing and applied anthropology or even participatory research methods at all. I was fortunate to move fairly smoothly into an academic career track and really was committed and enjoyed that work, and then found myself in the position of taking an involuntary exit and trying to figure out kind of on the fly how to build a new career as a practicing anthropologist. The first thing that I really kind of put my attention to was the field of emergency management. I had taught and done a little bit of research in the anthropology of disaster. I thought that would be a clear connection between my expertise and some professional connections that I had made, and some great professional opportunities. And I will say there are great jobs in emergency management for anthropologists. It is not a track that really worked out for me in any way. And I say that partly just to say, beware of just so stories, right? Becoming a practitioner is often a process of rooting and grubbing and finding out what matches for you and where the opportunities are in the area, the region, the place that you are working. So I just really want to acknowledge that this was not necessarily a linear transition for me. I will say, I'm in a kind of an interesting position I'll get to. I work in state government, but with local governments. My local governments are my clients and my key collaborators. There are many, many jobs in state and local government where anthropological skills will be highly relevant. Almost none of them advertise for anthropologists. You're going to have to learn how to translate your skills and explain your background and your value to that organization in other terms. Along the way through this transition, I have taken a wide variety of different roles. One of the very best pieces of advice that I got was a kind instructor in a professional development course who looked at me and said, "Do what you do." And I thought, wow, this is like some sort of koan, right? Like this is a great paradox that will lead to enlightenment. But what does it mean? His point was, Stephen, you're a researcher and you're interested in finding out about a new field. So marshal every skill that you have as a researcher to research your next career. And I took that quite literally. I went to the extent of like designing a research project and going through an IRB, right? I had a formal research project to understand my next career. I was an intern in my mid-40s. I started a small business. I was a solopreneur. I ran a one-person shop for about 2 years. I was a pro bono consultant. That just means you're giving your services away at a screaming good price. But it got me experience, and in state and local government, experience, the ability to deliver the goods is absolutely essential. And now I am quite happy to be an employee. I have a salary, I have benefits, I have an IT shop and HR and everybody standing behind me so that I can focus on what I'm doing. But it was a process to get there. Next slide. So this is, I call it the Department of Secondhand Advice. I would really love to spend time acknowledging all those people who helped me get where I am today. But I'm not gonna, like I said, I used formal mentorship programs. I had small business advisors who helped teach me the essential skills of running a small business. I did several professional certifications. I did an enormous number of informational interviews. And as I said, I did a research project. And one of the most striking things about people working in state and local government is how generous they will be with their time. It took me a while to learn that. It took me a while to understand when people say no, they don't mean it with any malice. It is just because they're busy. And 99% of the time they will say yes, give you their time. They are interesting, open, creative, helpful people, and they will give you an hour of their day to tell you who they are, what they do, and how they got where they are, because they've all had strange and twisty careers of their own. Next slide. So what do? I am a continuous process improvement consultant. I use a set of methodologies that is called Lean. Lean is a holistic participatory approach to reduce unnecessary effort and increase value for the customer. And what does that mean? Lean is essentially a form of practicing or applied anthropology. That is, it is holistic. It looks at systems from beginning to end instead of one specific task. It is participatory in that it emphasizes that the people who are doing the work know the work best. They have tacit knowledge, and you need to tap into that tacit knowledge in order to help them make their own work better. And it really is interested in questions about how can we do things better? What are some alternatives? Having a comparative approach, thinking creatively, and really thinking about who are we and why do we do this? Who do we do this work for in the end? Lean was really developed and perfected in some ways by Toyota. It is really associated with manufacturing, and there are jobs for anthropologists in manufacturing. But it is widespread now. It is found in service industries like Starbucks, across healthcare, across local government, in construction, in a wide variety of fields. So this isn't just a skill set that is relevant for government. Can you advance the slide? Here, the image here is of one Lean tool. This is a spaghetti map where someone asked employees to track out their path of how they walk through a laboratory to accomplish a specific task. And then the question became, how can we reorganize the tasks and reorganize the equipment so that there's less time spent walking and more time spent doing, right? There's a really clear, specific example of one Lean tool. Next slide. So where do I do this? I am a Lean specialist at the Office of the Washington State Auditor. And that always creates a little bit of a head scratcher. What is the state auditor doing in this world? But it really does make perfect sense. The vision of the Office of the State Auditor is to increase trust in government and to really be a good steward of all public funds. And so we are very much concerned with this idea of performance. Performance in the public sector plays the same role as profit in the private sector. I once heard somebody say performance is the question of how can we do more, better goodness, right? We are interested in the public good. We want to do more public good, and we want to do that public good better. And performance is all of those questions about how do we create more, better goodness in the world. And within that sort of framework of performance, I'd say there's sort of three career tracks or three areas where people can find employment. I'm a process improvement specialist. That means I work with frontline staff to help them improve their own work. That really is about performance. There's a second field that I have colleagues, and I've actually done a little bit of work across my agency with another team that does performance audit. Performance audit really looks at laws and rules and says, does that current activity in government actually accomplish the goals that were intended in the legislation? And how can that goal be met better? And then there's the third field of performance management. Performance management really asks the question, what data do we need to put in front of managers and executives so that they can make better day-to-day decisions? This can be a world of big data and abstract systems, and I'm absolutely convinced that we need more anthropologists working in this field, because it takes that real ground level understanding of what people are actually doing, how they're behaving, how they're entering data, in order to understand the quality of the data that managers are making their decisions based on. There's a lot of there's bad data, there's misleading data, there's data that's basically meaningless, there's data that really doesn't help anyone do anything out there. And anthropologists are in a great position to really move this whole field of performance management forward in some really fabulous ways. Next slide. So I think of myself as a facilitator. Facilitation is my skill. That is, I work with groups of people. And I think of facilitation as a practice of performative ethnography. What do I mean by that? Academic ethnography, we're familiar with, right? There's this pattern of doing interviews and participant observation, writing your field notes, and a laborious process of analysis and writing conference papers and publications and books that can take a very long time. And in the end, your readers and your informants may or may not overlap. Slide, can you click, please? I think of facilitation as performative ethnography. That is, your informants and your audience and you as an anthropologist are all in the same room at the same time. You're working together. You're defining the problem together. You're conducting the analysis. You're trying to anticipate unforeseen consequences and really look at things holistically. And in the end, you leave your ethnography there. Your audience and your informants are exactly the same group. The upside of this kind of performative ethnography is that it is tremendously intellectually stimulating. You are literally on your feet. You are on your toes all day. You are thinking in 14,000 different ways, and you're trying to explain basic concepts of social science every day. The downside is that you produce almost no field notes. You have very limited insight to the long-term impact of your work, and you produce almost no generalizable knowledge. Your knowledge is all the knowledge you produce with your informants is very local, very specific, very actionable, but you're not producing sort of generalizable knowledge for the most part. And if you click the slide, ultimately, both these forms of ethnography fulfill that old saw about the purpose of anthropology, to make the strange familiar and the familiar strange. When I'm working with my clients, they often don't understand the experience of their own customers, of the residents, of the people who are using their services. And I try to make that unfamiliar experience familiar to them. And I also try to take their own experience as employees, as people who do work every day, and make that experience that is very, very familiar just a little bit strange, so that they can step back from what they're doing and look at it with new eyes and think about it in new ways. Slide, please. So within that kind of framework about facilitation as being about a form of performative ethnography, I think it's just really important to acknowledge that there's a whole range of different domains that anthropologists can work in, and each one of those domains has a facilitation methodology that actually exists and has been refined and perfected over time. Whether we're talking about participatory rural appraisal in the field of international development, or design thinking, or liberating structures, or strategic foresight, these are bodies of knowledge and bodies of practice and professional connection. You can get training in all of those facilitation methodologies. You can get certification. And I think it's really important to say that all of those trainings and certifications, they're out there. You need those trainings and those certifications to get in the door. You will learn something from each one of those different kinds of training and certification. And then when you're actually out there in the field and doing the work, Anthropology is the special sauce that will make you stand out, that will make you be successful, that will make you different than your competition, than the other people doing that work. And you will learn tremendous things from the people who you share a facilitation methodology with, who aren't anthropologists. My closest collaborator is a mechanical engineer, and I cannot tell you how much my life as an anthropologist has been enriched by having a mechanical engineer as my right hand, right? Those are really fabulous combinations. So really take those facilitation or those other kinds of professional development training opportunities seriously, and then rely on your anthropology to help you really be wonderful. I think those are my notes.
So now we're going to move into the chat portion of our webinar today. And Jeff, did you want to facilitate it?
No, actually, you can go ahead and facilitate.
Okay, great. So the first question that we had was on the education level of the two presenters, and I responded saying you both had PhDs. I'm hoping I'm correct.
Yeah, I'll just say just a tiny bit about that. I do have a PhD, and I have found one of the pieces as I was making that transition that my mentors pointed out was to kind of make my own peace with that. That is, I have found a university where I have an association. I'm a fellow of the department, no money, gets me a library card, gets me access to some students. And that's a really wonderful relationship. And I absolutely am passionate about working with the students in that department at the bachelor's and master's level to find opportunities in these same fields. There are definitely opportunities in state and local government for people with a master's or a bachelor's degree in anthropology.
Great. Another question we had was about contract work. What is it? How do you find it? And is it available at both federal and state levels? Ariela?
I'll start.
Yeah.
This is Ariela. So contract work is essentially a different way to get into, at the federal level, a different way to get a federal job, but you're not working towards civil service in terms of the benefits that come with civil service, like long-term tenure or the retirement packages or things like that. So just to get into the nitty-gritty of the realities of the differences. Contract work is contract work. It's on, you know, a couple year contract, and the way you would find it, and let me take a step back. It depends on the agency. So in my agency, half of our staff are contractors, and that's probably because the permissions that it takes to get a federal position in place are very tricky and time consuming, and they need to be approved at many levels. Contract, you can spend your program budget funds in order to hire someone to help with program work. And so that's a reason why people, you know, create contract positions, because they don't require all those permissions for the long-term federal position. To find those positions, there are just so many contracting organizations that it's hard to start listing them for you. But if you wanted to look, for example, as an exercise, you could look in the Washington, D.C. area, even if you're not here, but just so that you can sort of see what it looks like, and look for a science position, or you can look for a social scientist position, and you might see things like, we need an expert in customer care for rocket ships. And you'll say, what does that say? And then you'll read down and it'll say, you need to have this security clearance, or you need to have experience with federal budgets, or you need to have experience with this. And you don't necessarily have to have those things as a BA student coming out, but that will indicate to you that this is a position that will be placed in a federal agency. You can also sort of look around the agency pages and see where people are hired from. So as an actual example, in my office, there are many people who work for UCAR, the University Consortium for Atmospheric Research. That is our contract agency that puts staff people into our work. The one thing I would say is that for any agency you go to as a contractor, I would really suggest talking to some people in your group about how they treat contractors. There's a mixed bag in my group. It's fairly even. We all go to the same meetings. We can do the same work. It doesn't seem to be a problem from what I understand. But I have some friends who are contractors at different agencies who have really struggled to get a seat at the table. And so they come in for a very particular type of work. That's what they're there for and nothing else. And so that could be very hard if you're really interested in strategic planning, or you're really interested in working with the public that might not be in the space that they want you to be in. So that's just sort of a difference that I would look for.
Okay, thank you. And Stephen, how does it work at the state level?
So it's a fascinating, it's to hear this kind of conversation about federal and state and local. At the state level, contracting is, at least in Washington, is pretty centrally organized. There's a state agency. You have to sort of pre-qualify as a contractor to get on those registries. If you're able to do it, then you are very quickly in, and state agencies can just sort of tap your standard contract and bring you in for a project. If you're just starting off, that's hard to do because those standard contracts generally require, like, your business has been in operation for 5 years. I'm just starting, how do I get in? The way you get in is that you start off as a subcontractor to a contractor. So you those contract lists are public. So then you can find out what companies have contracts, and you can contact them and say, hey, I have a one-person shop. And they very frequently subcontract out parts of their work within their umbrella contract. Local government is actually, there are some similar things in Washington where there's some sort of high-level contracts you can get into and registries, but there's actually even much, much more flexibility at the local level. Each individual city, town, library district, whatever, often has its own rules, but there's often a rule that says something like, anything under $25,000, we don't have to put out for a competitive bid. I can write you a contract for $23,999, and the city manager can sign it, and we're good. We're off to the races. And so you need to find out what each agency's rules are, and then it's really about relationship building, right? Then it's about getting to know these people, finding out what they need, offering them something that they want, and figuring out what the right price is. Because you don't want to do competitive bidding. Competitive bidding takes forever and you'll lose. But at $23,999, I can get the money, they can get the work, we're off to the races.
Thank you. That was great. And I know we did take quite a bit of time on that particular question, but I think it was an important one. And just so that everyone attending this webinar knows, we will post the responses to all of your questions on Communities. You all have access to Communities by virtue of having registered for this webinar. So give us about a week, and then you can go on and you can see all the answers to the questions. Our two presenters will be working over the next few days to compile their responses for you. So the next question is for Ariela. And Ariela, if you were doing field work, because I know you said mostly you are not, but if you were, and it involved community stakeholders using interviews, surveys, how do you get that kind of data gathering approved in a federal job?
That's a good question. If you ever find out, let me know. No, there is an actual answer to that. So I am doing some research now. I'm involved in a study with a collaborator at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, looking at small and medium business resilience and recovery from complex climate events that include the impacts of COVID-19. And it's a national survey. And we were able to get it approved because NIST has an umbrella Paperwork Reduction Act sort of certification check mark. And we had to go through the Office of Management and Budget. We had to go through the necessary blocks to make sure that the work was approved and didn't violate that umbrella. But the Paperwork Reduction Act does limit the amount of ethnographic work that an anthropologist can do. I think you can't ask questions to more than 9 people without approval. It's possible to get through the Paperwork Reduction Act. It is possible. It just takes a long period of time, about a year. Maybe depends on the different agencies and how they move it up the chain. But in general, I have found it more successful to go through a competitive review process. So finding a partner in a university to do the work through a cooperative agreement or through a grant to say, these are the real research questions that we're interested in. Can you do it for us? And then give us the outcomes. And so in that way, I am deeply connected to the research, but I'm not doing the nitty gritty of doing the ethnographic work. And that has also been a successful way to do it. But it's a process. So if that's what you're hoping to do in government, you should really find a position that's designed for that work, where there might already be a structure in place to allow you to get through those hoops.
Okay, great. And at the state level, Stephen, the same question about data gathering and getting it approved. Ethnographic data gathering.
Yeah, it's so not really what I do, and a little bit complicated because I don't do research, right? Like I said, I am not shooting for anything that in my work that is generalizable. I am creating knowledge within an organization to improve their management.
Sure.
It's very, very local knowledge. And so it isn't really at its core, it's not research. There are other parts, so the State Department of Social and Health Services has a research office. Their office is by vast majority focused on quantitative research. They do qualitative work. They have an IRB. There's a whole, it looks like a research shop. I will just put it that way. And then in the field of performance audit, there is actually often within the field of performance audit, mixed methods approaches. That is, they're always looking for some sort of statistical data, but they often are combining that in very interesting ways with on the ground, more ethnographic approaches. Performance audit, again, is not research. And so it exists under its own regulations and rules. Let me put it that way. There are audit standards for performance audit, and you live and you die under those rules.
Okay. That sounds great. Thank you. Sydney had a question about, is having a degree in applied anthropology helpful for a job in the public sector? Either of you.
I'll take it. This is Ariela. My PhD is in applied anthropology, and I would say that the applied part did not help me that much. It could, I think it depends on the program itself, and I think that's really what it comes down to. In the end, I was always interested in working in the public sector, but my program turned out to be a lot more critical theory heavy, and I was involved in that, and I didn't get some of the skills that I needed later, which is why the transition through a fellowship helped me build that skill set. But I know that there are many, many applied anthropology programs, especially at the master's level, who take those skills really seriously at the forefront. And so if you can avoid having to sort of re-educate yourself later in those things, then I think that they're definitely worth it. But I would look at a program by program approach and say, is this going to teach me the writing skills? Is this going to teach me the statistical skills? Is this going to teach me how to manage a big budget in the way that I would really get a job with? Am I going to be competitive against someone who came out of a policy program? That's the kind of thing I would ask when choosing a program. But I think it could be very helpful, because if it does do those things and you get the anthropology skills, then I think you're pretty set to be unique in the federal government space, at least.
Great. And Stephen, do you have a comment on?
I absolutely everything Ariela already said.
Okay.
And then experience, right? So does it give you the writing skills, the technical skills, but are you going to do a project? Can you say, I have been here, I did this, I worked with this client, I produced these results?
Great. Gabriela asks about, can foreigners apply for federal jobs in the public sector?
Unfortunately, you can't be appointed to a federal civil servant position if you are a foreigner. You have to be a citizen or a national. There are exceptions to that. I think they're at a much higher level than I would ever get to, but there are options. I don't know what the rules are for contracting. I don't know if the same rules apply or those are different ways in. I think some of the PhD programs and fellowship programs might have different rules too, but it's important to look. And the place to look is OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, which is the federal government sort of very big HR agency. And they have all their rules listed on their webpage.
Okay, super. Are there any masters or other degrees outside of anthropology that would be a good degree to have for a career in the public sector? Stephen, it sounds like maybe something really in business.
Yeah, I'd say there are very good business, a business degree or a master's in public administration. I think there are tremendous opportunities for people with an anthropology background to go into fields like planning, and then you can, urban and regional planning degrees have a lot of overlap and connection to anthropology. Yeah, bunches of different things. Law. I have a great colleague who has an MA in anthropology and a JD, and she can like dance in really, really interesting circles.
And Ariela, any comment on that question? An additional master's degree out there?
I don't, it's a hard question because you have to pay for master's degrees. And so I'm always very hesitant to recommend an additional degree if it's not really going to have a financial benefit. I will say that I work with a lot of people who have policy degrees, so environmental policy degrees or energy policy degrees, that sort of interdisciplinary work where you get, both technical and really policy-oriented knowledge. And so if you're coming from a BA and you have in anthropology and you're thinking about what to do next and you really have your eyes set on public work, you might consider that kind of interdisciplinary master's degree or PhD program where you get the experience Stephen was talking about of doing a project, but you're able to bring some of the more holistic human perspectives to that work. It's a tough question.
Sure, I understand. And also, Ariela, professional development or mentorship resources. Ali is asking about being a recent PhD and getting some preparation for policy-oriented fellowship applications.
Yeah, that's a good question because those fellowship applications are a whole new ballgame. They involve writing about your research and your experience in a way that you probably haven't done if you're in a typical PhD program. So my advice is to, think about the research you did, demonstrate why you did it and what the particular policy implications might be for that work. And then even if it's not true, you need to be able to verbalize it and to imagine it and then to defend it. And by concentrating that down, get rid of all the theory, but by concentrating that down to the real application of the work, you'll have a much more successful application. The other thing I would recommend is that those networks of the policy fellowships, I know the PMFs are like this as much, the Presidential Management Fellowship people as much as the AAAS Fellowship people, have a huge network in the federal government. And so you can use LinkedIn to find people who have done the program in some place that you want to be, in a particular agency that you're interested in, and contact them. And I've been contacted out of the blue by many people, and I usually take those opportunities to do some mentorship. And so I would not hesitate to reach out. What's the worst that could happen? They say no, but I mean, you might be lucky enough to even get an application in your hand. So, that's how I would start.
Great. Charlotte Marie has a question for Stephen. I've heard lean before, and yours is the first time it has sounded at all interesting. How do your colleagues understand what you do?
Well, thank you for the compliment. And I'm not quite sure, so I can think of colleagues in two different directions, right? So I have anthropology colleagues, and they often do a little bit of a head scratch. And then that's why I'm good about talking about lean is facilitation. Facilitation is performative ethnography. My lean colleagues, that is other people who do this kind of work, actually have been, how can I put this? Like I started learning about lean and I would introduce myself as an anthropologist and everybody would lean in and go, oh, that's so cool. Right? Like, tell me more about that, right? Like their eyes would get big. It's really, really interesting because the people who like read and study and think, who are like lean heads, right? Who like live in that world, really do take the concept of organizational culture pretty seriously. They're frustrated. They don't really know what to do with it, but they know it's important. And so when you say you're an anthropologist, like their mouths start watering and their eyes get big and they like, I actually had somebody say to me, well, tell me how to fix my culture, right? Like, and I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about the way you're framing the question. But it was the beginning of a great conversation, right? So again, it depends on which colleagues you're talking about.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Another question for you also. When you are called in and you are evaluating the kinds of work processes that people are using, doesn't that raise some eyebrows among those people being evaluated?
Yes, or it can. Let me put it that way. The dirty word on the street, if somebody wants to smear lean, they say it stands for less employees are needed. And as soon as I hear that whoever's calling me in, the executive, the manager, they're like, we need a lean process because I got to fire 3 people and I don't know which ones to fire, I'm out. I don't need to work with them, right? I am really fortunate in that I am paid by the state auditor and my clients are local governments and they do not pay for my work. So I have a lot more independence and a lot more flexibility in negotiating that relationship. It's a wonderful way to not be paid by your clients. That's a great tip if you can figure it out. And then I would say kind of that's always my approach. The thing that I always lead with is I'm here to help your organization get better, to learn about process improvement. And so I'm not evaluating, I'm teaching, I'm sharing. I am empowering your staff to do better work. And if you're not interested in that, that is you, the executive, the manager, the person who's calling me in. If you want me to evaluate your organization, that's not what we do. If you want me to help your organization and help your staff become better, become critical thinkers, do things with more innovation, hey, I'm your guy, right? It does. It can have that sort of evaluative mode. Other people do it that way. I don't.
You turn it on its head, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question for Stephen. What anthropology skills do you use in evaluation and performance management?
List your favorite anthropology skill, I use it, right? That is, every time I'm working with a new client, I'm doing a new research design. I am constantly interviewing people and doing participant observation. And in fact, in Lean, participant observation has its own word. It's called going to the Gemba, right? It has this kind of like veneer, it has its own jargon. It's participant observation, folks, right? If you remember participant observation equals going to the Gemba, you understand what's going on, right? You just have to have different words coming out of your mouth, right? What else do I am constantly, I said I don't really take field notes. That is, I don't take field notes for my benefit, but I am constantly creating notes for the client. I am documenting and recording their conversation, which is just like taking field notes. In fact, I'm writing kind of mini reports, although they don't even look like technical papers, but they are the thing that the client holds on to remember what we've done and to take the work that we've done and keep it going forward. I'm communicating, I'm teaching, I'm communicating, I'm learning visual communication. I have to know basic statistics and data visualization. It's the whole gamut. And I'm not necessarily equally good at all of those things. I am challenged to get better at all of those things every day.
And Ariela, that seems like a good question for you. What anthropological skills do you use in your work?
I use a lot of synthesis skills, ways of reading across different data fields and different data types, different outputs, and coming up with commonalities and things that I can present as this is what's happening in the world. I use my analytical skills regularly to say these are the big questions we need to ask, and these are the questions that are coming forward that we haven't been able to address. I think the thing that I use the most, though, is I call them anthropological sensibilities, like my ability to ask questions in a certain way, my ability to think about certain kinds of dynamics between people and communities, and constantly using that general knowledge of society and of culture, and using that to frame the rest of my work. I really am not doing that much research, but I use my knowledge of anthropology, all those years of schooling, to inform almost all of my actions on a daily basis.
Yes, Stephen?
Can I jump back in there? I'll just give one other little quick anecdote. I don't often, but every once in a while, I really get to kind of turn on sort of my critical theory skills. So like there was an example where a city was really trying to do good work, and somebody made the suggestion, well, we could just reach out to the homeowners association and we'll like give them a special pipeline into city services. And I was able to say, and who has homeowners associations, and who are you trying to serve, and what problems are you trying to serve? And just kind of say like, how can I put this? The person who made that suggestion was reaching for what was available with a completely good intent. And when I was able to point out that that was going to give more social capital to the already wealthy and powerful, they were like, oh no, we really didn't want to do that. Right. So there are these kind of moments where I'm really kind of doing this other thing, right? That's sort of more like social analysis.
I think we're going to have to call it a day on the questions, but as I indicated earlier, we will answer all of the questions, including the ones that didn't get answered verbally today. So hang on for about a week and we'll have something to you. Gabby, could we have the next slide? So we have two quick slide summary. This first slide on public sector jobs are the summary points from Ariela's federal job that anthropologists have technical and administrative skills that are useful in those kinds of jobs. That science policy is a very rewarding path to continue engaging in research outside of academia. So for those of you who headed into anthropological practice. And then finally, to be successful, you will need to articulate and demonstrate the practical applications of the experience that you have as an anthropologist. People are interested in knowing what is good about anthropology. What can it do for us? Next slide. And Stephen's summary includes the first point, do what you do. So you network through snowball sampling, and then you can treat your next career as a research project. Number two, experience matters. So become an intern, start a business as he did. Do something pro bono and show that you can actually deliver what you said you would deliver. And then finally, learn the lingo. You can get certified in various domains of knowledge. And as he calls it, anthropology is your secret sauce. Next slide. So closing remarks, we already have up on the community's website a list of resources and references for you for public sector. We have posted both PowerPoints and PDF files. And within a week or so, we will have the responses to the chat questions. And then sometime after that, we will have the recording of this webinar. Next slide. And you'll be getting an evaluation in the mail, in your email. Please respond to it. It helps us a lot. And then as Jeff indicated earlier, we have 2 more webinars in the spring series. The first one, or I should say the first one, the seventh one is on using archaeological and anthropological skill sets as accessible designers. That's next Thursday at 1 Eastern. And the last one is on geographic information systems. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for your attention. We're really glad that you were here today, and hope to see you next week.